There's a specific feeling you only get in a movie theater when a film is truly firing on all cylinders. You stop looking at the screen and start living inside it. You hold your breath, you grip the armrests. For almost 30 years, Mission Impossible was the guaranteed dealer of that exact feeling. The Prague rooftop, the Burj Khalifa, the bathroom fight in Fallout doesn't feel like you're watching an action sequence. It feels like you're taking a punch. So when the final film came out, I was there, opening weekend, sat through all 170 minutes, walked out thinking, yeah, that was fine. And then I just forgot about it. Not the plot details, the feeling. 11 months later, I could barely reconstruct a single scene. I remember Fallout more clearly, and I watched that in 2018. I still feel the weight of that Kashmir fistfight. I still hear the score building under the helicopter chase. 7 years on, and that movie is still somewhere in my body. The Final Reckoning? I had to rewatch it just to write this video. A lot of people enjoyed this movie, genuinely, and I get it. The stunts are real. Tom Cruise left everything on the field. But for me, it never felt like the ending this franchise earned. The longer I sat with that, the more I needed to figure out why. Why does a film that came out 11 months ago feel like it happened to someone else, while one I watched years ago still feels vivid? So I went back, watched it again. What I found was a film that isn't bad, it's deeply compromised. Through a specific chain of decisions made under financial panic that cracked the screenplay at its foundation and never let it recover. This is why The Final Reckoning failed the franchise that made it. Hi, I'm Mac from Mac & Flicks. The Final Reckoning was never supposed to be called The Final Reckoning. It was conceived, written, and shot as Dead Reckoning Part 2, the second half of a two-part story, built on the assumption that the audience would show up for Part 1. They didn't. Dead Reckoning cost $291 million, ballooned by COVID shutdowns and years of delays. It earned $571 million globally. Fallout made $791 million on a $178 million budget. And before anyone tries to blame Barbenheimer for that gap, Dead Reckoning's 5-day domestic opening came in below Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which opened 2 weekends prior. Neither Barbie nor Oppenheimer had touched theaters yet. The audience wasn't there regardless. Paramount panicked. The Part 2 subtitle disappeared. The film was rebranded as a standalone finale, and the script had to follow. If newcomers who skipped 2023 needed to understand what was happening, the first act had to become a recap. The entity, the cruciform keys, the history between Ethan and Gabriel, all of it needed dialogue to reestablish it. That rebranding decision is where the damage started. In post-production, McQuarrie and editor Eddie Hamilton tried to fix the pacing problem by rebuilding the film as a non-linear cut. Drop the audience into the action first, explain the entity later. McQuarrie and Cruise recognized immediately that it didn't work. Characters kept referencing the AI before the audience understood what it was. The non-linear version was scrapped. The linear edit went back in, with a new voiceover-driven opening bolted to the front just to make the story followable. The first act became what you watched, 60 minutes of people in rooms explaining things to each other. McQuarrie also confirmed a full cold open was planned and shot. A 1989 prologue, de-aged Cruise, showing the origins of Ethan's relationship with Gabriel and Marie. The scene that would have answered the one question this film needed to answer: why does this rivalry exist? Why does Gabriel matter? What did Marie mean to Ethan before all of this started? Gone. Because McQuarrie determined that de-aging the 3 actors involved would cost as much as the entire submarine sequence, and that even if they found the money, the visual effect would pull the audience out of the story entirely. Both were real problems. Both were defensible reasons to pull the scene. What's not defensible is what followed. He pulled it and replaced it with almost nothing. A brief Marie flashback, a line of exposition summarizing the backstory. No scene of Ethan sitting with it. No conversation between Ethan and another character that fills in even a fraction of that history. The emotional core of the central conflict was removed, and the film moved forward as if it had never existed. The movie you watched had its villain backstory removed, its structure reversed and then unreversed, and its first act rewritten to serve people who hadn't seen the previous film. That chain of damage is exactly what we're about to get into, starting with the 60 minutes that broke everything else. Mission Impossible has always understood something that a lot of blockbusters forget. Action carries more weight than dialogue. You don't need a character to explain the danger. You need to see it. Fallout drops you into a nightmare bathroom fight before you've processed where you are. Rogue Nation opens on a man clinging to a plane. Ghost Protocol blows up the Kremlin in the first act. You learn how these films work through what happens to people, not through what people say is going to happen. The final reckoning opens with people talking. The first 40 to 60 minutes of this 170-minute film are almost entirely dialogue. Bunkers, decompression chambers, government conference rooms, characters cycling through the same loop. The entity wants to launch nuclear weapons. The entity controls global infrastructure. The entity predicted this conversation. Ethan has to find the key. The key unlocks the drive. The drive is on the submarine. I sat through this loop 4 or 5 times before anything physical happened. The whole time, I kept waiting for the film to start. You can't be afraid of a threat you've only been told about. The entity is the most talked about villain in franchise history, and the least felt. Everyone keeps saying it's a god. We never watch it do anything that makes us believe them. What makes it worse is what the exposition does to the action sequences themselves. Every major set piece in this film gets described before it happens. Grace is told she'll cut through Arctic ice with an orange chainsaw on a sled. And then we watch Grace cut through Arctic ice with an orange chainsaw on a sled. The explanation drained the execution of everything it needed. By the time the scene plays out, you're just confirming what you already know. There's no discovery, no danger, because the blueprint was already handed to you. McQuarrie defended this by saying the plot was too complex to leave unexplained. That's the tell. A plot that needs over an hour of instruction to become comprehensible isn't complex, it's broken. The dialogue is where it gets almost comical. Characters finish each other's sentences, move through briefings in perfect unison, speak like they've rehearsed it. I've watched this movie twice and I still can't shake how robotic the conversations feel. Like each character was handed exactly their portion of the information and told to deliver it cleanly. Real people under pressure stumble, they repeat themselves, they say the wrong thing. Nobody in this film does any of that. They sound like they're reading off a whiteboard. Underneath all of it, there are these long monologues about how singular Ethan Hunt is. How no one else could do this. How the world has specifically needed him for 30 years. I understand why the script goes there. You want the audience to feel the weight of the final mission. But when a film keeps telling you the hero is irreplaceable, it's quietly reassuring you he survives. The moment you stop worrying about whether Ethan makes it, the film has nothing left to hold you with. There's a reason this keeps happening on McQuarrie's productions specifically. He and crews build the action set pieces first, the stunt, the location, the spectacle, and write the connective scenes during production. The dialogue and briefings are kept in small, cheap environments so they can be scrapped and reshot whenever the action changes. In some films that method works fine because the plot is tight enough that the connective scenes stay short. Here, with an abstract, AI-driven plot that kept shifting during a chaotic production, what you get is exactly what you watched. People in rooms patching together a story that kept changing underneath them. The score compounds the problem. Lorne Balfe left before this one. He'd scored both Fallout and Dead Reckoning. Precision work that builds under a scene and releases at exactly the right moment. His replacements kept the percussive style, but couldn't tell a briefing room from an action sequence. The music plays at the same heat throughout, which means 170 minutes all feel like the same scene at different volumes. The film also flashes back constantly, not just to previous entries, but to scenes that happened earlier in the same movie. During emotional beats, the editing cuts to dialogue the villain said just minutes prior. It's the film nudging you. Remember, this is important. Feel something here. If the scene is doing its job, you don't need the reminder. If it isn't, the reminder won't save it. On top of all that, the objective keeps splitting. You need the key. The key opens the drive. The drive is on the submarine. The submarine's location is held by someone in Alaska. Each step requires its own briefing scene. Each completed step unlocks the next explanation. By the midpoint, I'd watched more planning than action. Every set piece had already been outlined before I got to see it. Now add the nostalgia on top of all this, which is the part that genuinely baffled me because of who made this film. McQuarrie said publicly during the Dead Reckoning press tour that fan service is poison, that callbacks force the audience to leave the current story, remember a different one, and come back, and that break destroys the chain. He said that, out loud, on the record. Then he made a film that does it 4 times. The worst is the Rabbit's Foot retcon. In Mission Impossible 3, J.J. Abrams introduced a biohazard-marked canister called the Rabbit's Foot, and deliberately never explained what was inside. The point was that it didn't matter what was inside. What mattered was what Ethan was willing to do to get it back. The final reckoning reveals it contained an early version of the entity's source code. A sealed canister from 2006 was a prototype artificial intelligence. Every mission Ethan ran across 30 years retroactively becomes backstory for a single antagonist introduced in film 7. The franchise collapses inward on itself. Then there's Jasper Briggs. Introduced in Dead Reckoning as a government agent hunting Hunt, the final reckoning reveals he's the son of Jim Phelps, the original TV series protagonist who was turned into a traitor in the 1996 De Palma film. The reveal changes nothing about the plot, resolves neatly, and vanishes. Look at Top Gun Maverick. When that film brings back Val Kilmer's Iceman, it works because Iceman forces Maverick to confront everything he's been running from for 30 years. It drives the theme. Briggs being Phelps Jr. drives nothing. The film is actively pretending to do something meaningful with its history while doing nothing at all. William Donlow also comes back, the CIA analyst Ethan sent to Alaska in 1996, showing up at the climax to help defuse the bomb and tell Ethan the exile led to a happier life. I get what the film is reaching for. I felt it for a second, but it requires you to accept that this specific man is standing at the most consequential moment in franchise history. The urgency drains out at exactly the moment you needed to be pulled in. All of that, the briefings, the chained objectives, the callbacks, feeds the same core problem. You feel it most sharply when you look at what it did to the characters. The screenplay's most interesting idea is that Ethan caused the entity. By stealing the rabbit's foot in MI3 and delivering it to the IMF, he handed the government the source code that would evolve into the world-ending AI. His greatest professional success planted the seed of all of this. Gabriel weaponizes it, tells Ethan that the entity exists because of what he set in motion 30 years ago, a hero responsible for his own greatest enemy, guilt as the engine of the final conflict. That's exactly what a franchise finale should be built around, and I was genuinely excited when this landed. The film doesn't know what to do with it. Think about what Gabriel is actually telling Ethan in that moment. Every person hurt by the entity, every government destabilized, every nuclear threat, all of it traces back to a mission Ethan completed successfully. He didn't fail. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. That's the ground shifting under the entire identity of what Ethan Hunt has been doing with his life. The question it raises should haunt every scene that follows. If doing your job perfectly can cause all of this, what does it mean to keep doing the job? The film never asks it. There's no scene in the second half where something in Ethan has changed. No moment where a decision he makes looks different because of what he now knows about himself. There should be a beat. Somewhere in the third act, he lets someone take a risk he'd normally eliminate because he no longer trusts his own judgment about the damage he causes. The script never builds that. Gabriel delivers the accusation, the screenplay marks it delivered, and we're back to the briefing. Gabriel was set up as the most personal villain in franchise history. Dead Reckoning established him as the man who murdered Marie, the woman whose death framed Ethan for a crime and forced him into the IMF. The specific human being responsible for the entire trajectory of Ethan Hunt's life. The franchise has done this before. Solomon Lane was the dark mirror of the IMF, someone who believed the same things Ethan believed and arrived at the opposite moral conclusion. August Walker was what Ethan looks like from the outside. Brute force, absolute conviction, willing to kill anyone for the mission. Both of them pushed on something underneath the action. Gabriel needed that same foundation. The 1989 prologue was supposed to give it to him. It was cut. Nothing replaced it beyond a brief flashback. The Marie backstory isn't in the dialogue, isn't in a meaningful scene, isn't in a single line Gabriel delivers that earns its weight. Esai Morales is a capable actor. You can see the presence in flashes. But a villain without that personal history can only do one thing: say threatening things and wait for the finale. Gabriel does exactly that for 2.5 hours. By the time he dies, you realize you never once felt anything about him. Not fear, not the specific hatred you'd feel watching the man responsible for everything Ethan became finally get what he deserves. He's just a man in a coat getting thrown out of a biplane at the end of a film that never told you why he mattered. Gabriel isn't the only character the script fails. Luther Stickle dies early in this film, the only character outside Ethan in every single entry since 1996. 29 years. Every impossible mission, every time the plan collapsed, every moment Ethan needed someone in his ear who actually believed he'd make it out, Luther was there for all of it. Ving Rhames plays the sacrifice with everything it deserves. The film moves on within minutes. No scene of Ethan sitting with it. No scene of Benji's reaction. And Benji has been Luther's closest friend across 6 films. The team registers the death and goes back to briefing. When a character death doesn't change the emotional temperature of the story around it, it stops being a death and becomes a plot mechanism. The film used Luther to prove stakes were real without actually paying for what that loss should have cost. The villain problem goes even deeper than Gabriel. That's what I need to get into next. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this breakdown, please hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a ton. The best Mission Impossible villains work because they're designed to neutralize what Ethan does best. Solomon Lane forced him to outthink someone who could anticipate his every move. August Walker forced him to outmaneuver someone physically superior in every way. The villain exists to push the hero to the absolute limit of his specific skill set. That tension is the engine. The entity has no skill set to match. Ethan reads situations, reads people, adapts faster than whoever's trying to stop him. Against a system that already modeled his next 17 moves before he made them, that whole ability is neutralized. There's nothing to read, no one to outmaneuver, no improvisation possible against something that predicted your improvisation 6 steps ago. I kept waiting for the film to find a way around this, some angle where Ethan's humanity becomes the exploit. It never comes. Cinema has great AI villains, but they usually have physical rules the hero can eventually exploit. The T-1000 in Terminator 2 is unstoppable, but it still has to physically run you down, which means it can be physically trapped. The entity has no physical rules. It's playing God from inside the internet, and there's no equivalent weakness to find. So the screenplay tries to invent one. It gives the entity arbitrary hardware dependencies, specific keys, a specific submarine, a 300 terabyte drive at a specific location. An AI described as all-knowing, somehow completely dependent on physical objects being in the right place. The limitations feel invented because they are. They exist so Ethan has something to actually do. The entity's plan also recycles the franchise. Launching nuclear missiles from a bunker? Ghost Protocol did that. Fallout did that. An AI with the ability to bring down the entire global digital infrastructure, and its plan is the exact threat this franchise already resolved twice. I sat in the theater waiting for the twist that revealed the nuclear threat was a misdirect. The real attack was something we'd never seen before. The twist doesn't come. Gabriel exists to paper over the entity's absence. He's the physical body you can put in the same frame as Tom Cruise. Without his backstory, Gabriel is just a man executing instructions for a program. He spends 2.5 hours essentially Googling things for a computer, stealing objects, delivering monologues about fate. He has no menace of his own. It all borrowed from the entity, and the entity never felt real enough to lend it. The franchise's weakest antagonist was supposed to be its most personal. That's the specific cruelty of what the production chaos cost this film. Tom Cruise on the wing of a World War II biplane, at altitude, no parachute, aircraft rolling inverted. That footage is in the movie, it's real. If you watched it and felt something, I understand. The craft is extraordinary. The problem is what surrounds it. The sequence cuts constantly. Ethan on the wing, Benji bleeding out in a South African server room, Grace managing the drive, the nuclear countdown running. 4 simultaneous threads, none of them breathing. Every time the biplane reaches peak danger, the film pulls you to Benji hiding behind a concrete pillar in a generic interior. When Nolan cuts between 4 simultaneous threads at the end of Inception, it works because the layers affect each other. A van rolling off a bridge changes the gravity in the hotel. The tension compounds. Here, the threads don't compound, they just interrupt. The greatest stunt in the franchise's history gets broken up every 30 seconds by a shootout that belongs in a completely different film. Ethan also swims 300 meters through freezing Arctic water without a gas mask and comes out ready to fight. I know this franchise plays in heightened reality, that's fine, but there's a line, and the climax crosses it at the exact moment it needs you fully believing. The ending has a deeper problem that was written in before production even started. The entity can't be destroyed. By the climax, the film has established that the AI wove itself into the global internet. Destroying the source code outright would take down cyberspace with it. So the only option is trapping it in a physical drive. The film's ending was always going to be a box. That's a design error committed before a single frame was shot. The villain was built without a destroyable form, which means the climax could never deliver what it needed to, the feeling that something is permanently over. Code can be copied. A backup server almost certainly exists. The threat the film spent 170 minutes calling existential is now a carry-on item. Grace hands Ethan the drive in Trafalgar Square. They exchange nods. Everyone disperses. Ethan takes a walk through London. That's it. 30 years, 8 films. The man who climbed the Burj Khalifa, held his breath underwater for 6 minutes, jumped out of a plane at 25,000 feet. His ending is a walk, alone, with a briefcase. No retirement, no acknowledgement of what he gave. Just a man and a city, and the quiet implication that there's probably another mission whenever the studio decides it's time. Fallout ends with Ethan in a hospital bed, stripped of everything, still refusing to let anyone else carry the weight. That's a character. The Final Reckoning ends with Ethan accepting a drive in a public square and going for a walk. That's a franchise protecting its assets. I went into the rewatch hoping I'd missed something, that the memory failure was mine. It wasn't. None of these problems are accidents. They're consequences. What makes it painful is that you can see the good film inside this one. The idea that Ethan caused the entity is genuinely compelling. A hero reckoning with the cost of his own choices is exactly what a franchise finale should be built around. Gabriel could have been the most personal villain in the series' history. Luther's death could have been its most devastating moment. The Biplane stunt is extraordinary physical filmmaking. Those pieces were there. The production circumstances prevented them from ever connecting into something that felt like a real goodbye. Fallout is still somewhere in my body 7 years later. The Final Reckoning I had to rewatch to remember. A franchise that gave us Prague, Kashmir, and that Paris motorcycle chase deserves something that lasted longer than a summer.